Right, g'day money miners. 23rd of May, Tuesday, and we are mixing it up today and not talking about St. Barbara Genesis or Silver Lake because there has been no further developments. What are the listeners and ourselves going to do with this variation in content, Travis Ricciardo?
Probably talk about something mining related, Matty.
Yeah, well, and as we said, JD is on annual leave. Did you approve that bloody form? How did he get that so early in the bloody piece? But he's on annual leave, so there is more of a chance of more mining stuff getting talked because I won't try and compete with JD on financial knowledge. So today we're getting into
we will go deep.
We are going a bit deep, pardon the pun, because we are going back underground at Capricorn Copper. So 29Metals have put their updated guidance out, and this is following from the heavy rainfall.
They pulled their
event.
Guidance a while ago, didn't they? So they pulled guidance not that long ago. JD covered that one, and now they've put this revised guidance out.
Yeah, and I guess the confirmation of the plan going forward. So, look, they had, for context, they had heavy rainfall in North Queensland between 6th and 10th of March, and it's inundated their sub-level cave and damaged their water facility. So, look, overall, just a tragedy for workers, shareholders, everything, something like this. Look, we can probably go into jurisdictions, Trav, of jurisdictional risk, even just in a good country like Australia, but when you're exposed to cyclones, things like this can happen. So it is a risk to consider. Now, look, Esperanza South, so that's their sub-level cave. So that contains 500 megalitres of water at the moment. And
what's a megaliter? Is that like the old swimming pools?
Yeah, I don't know.
Is that a megaliter? I remember being told that the big giant swimming pool it was at the Oasis, which is the country town swimming pool, was a megaliter.
Well, if we go, here we go. How many megalitres in an Olympic swimming pool? 2.5 megalitres.
Oh, there you go.
In an Olympic swimming pool. So
gotcha.
That's a lot of bloody. What's that? Jeez, put myself on the spot there. 200 Olympic swimming pools of water. So, and we'll go into some assumptions on how long it will take to pump that out. Now, the thing about Esperanza South is that it's a sub-level cave. So that means there's a surface subsidence on the top. So like sub-level cave is when it's not backfilled, the rock just fails and propagates the way down, but you create a sinkhole on the surface. So you effectively provide another link between the underground mine and the surface for water to get in. Normally water can only get through your portals and your ventilation shafts if they're not flood protected, but this big surface subsidence provides another funnel for water to get in. So you know how Ernest Henry was also impacted by the flooding, so that's a sub-level cave as well. So that extra entry point adds to the issue of trying to control water in these heavy events. And the situation there is that the water treatment facility has also been a complete loss. They've assumed it's a complete loss. I think it's still underwater along with the workshop. Now,
what's that water treatment facility treating the water for?
Okay, so because it's a copper mine, so it's a sulfide ore body.
Yep.
So that all the water that is underground that comes into contact with these sulfide rocks contaminates the water. So
gotcha.
you get hydrogen sulfide in the water, and then you can't discharge that to the environment.
Gotcha. So there's quite like a big environmental issue.
Toxic. Yeah, it's toxic. So it can, depending on the level of concentration, you'll be killing wildlife. The fact that it needs to be treated to remove the sulfides before you can actually discharge it. And I think it also needs to be, pretty sure it would need to be treated to reuse it underground as well.
Yeah.
Can't confirm that, but
so that'd be a top priority, is to have a solution for that ASAP, right?
Yes. So they're essentially snookered with the whole thing. So there's a couple of things to go through. So one is the water, because so you've got all that water underground. The surface water storage now using like looks like they're using pits, their tailings facility, everything's full up there, or most close to full. So the only way to get rid of that is either to evaporate it, which they've said they've got extra evaporation technology in. So that's like literally spraying water into the air in a fine mist and increasing the evaporation rate. But then then you can discharge it to the environment. But the permit, which I've been told, the permit for Capricorn Copper in North Queensland, you can only discharge in the wet season. So if it's not in wet season, you discharge it, can be harm to the environment, because I would assume you've got a higher chance of the concentration of sulfides being high. But if it's wet season, it would be more diluted.
Yeah.
So it says they are currently seeking environmental regulatory approval to release some of that water, depending on the flow rate and the discharge location. But it says release of significant volumes are likely constrained to the wet season between November and April. So until they can free up room on the surface to store water, they cannot pump out the water from that Esperanza South. So that water, that 500 megalitres, has to stay there until they can, one, get the room on the surface to store it, and then two, get the treatment capability to treat it before discharging into the environment or recycling it. But they are, by the sounds there, I've also been told they're essentially pouring lime into the current water storage facilities, because they don't have the treatment facilities, so they're pouring lime in to treat it in situ.
Within this...
Within these, I think it seems like it's in one pit. There's some in the like these settling ponds.
Yeah.
So
adding the lime is kind of what would ordinarily happen in the treatment plant.
Well, geez, I'm getting into bloody. I should have called some water scientists, because I've gone deep into water today. But that would neutralise the sulfides in the water, so effectively make it not as contaminated. So you'd need to test it. There'd be a lot of testing that'd have to go on to make sure if they do get approval to discharge that small volume, it would be within the safe limits.
How important is Esperanza South in the context of Capricorn?
Well, that is their flagship, the sub-level cave. Yeah. So that is one of their major ore sources. Yeah. So they've essentially cut it off.
Yeah.
Now, that 500 megalitres, if you're going to put that in a pumping capacity, so first thing you've got to do, you've got to pump it out to get back in there. So to get access to the underground mine. So 500 megalitres. Now, so for the underground mining buffs out there, if you've got two 90 kilowatt pumps, now they're pretty much the biggest bloody submersible pumps you could probably chuck at the bottom of a decline.
I feel like this is
pontoons.
This is a maths question we got coming up. You got to paint a scenario.
Yeah. So two 90 kilowatt pumps. So if you had two of them down there, so that's some big infrastructure to get down and maintain. Now, they will pump out about 50 litres a second. One website said 55, so let's work on 50. Now, that'll give you, say, 100 litres a second, say at 90% utilisation. That 500 megalitres, if you had those pumps running 90% of the time, will take 64 days to pump that mine out. So over 2 months just to pump the water out. Yeah. Okay, so now that's pending. You've got the storage availability on the surface. Now, once you do pump it out, you've got all the electrical infrastructure that will need replacing. So your electrical boxes, your substations, your fans, they really do not appreciate being underwater as any electrical component done. And then there's possibly equipment down there as well that would need replacing or getting removed. So pending how quick they got all the equipment out of the hole before the flooding.
Is there be any structural issues?
Well, that's when the ground support is the issue there. Yeah. So you've got the ground support is galvanised. I'm not sure of the ground support structure, but if there is galvanised mesh and galvanised bolts, even though they're galvanised, it's a surface coating, but you leave them underwater or in contact with water for a long time, there's a chance they can start significantly corroding. So, and when they corrode, the integrity of all of it is damage. So it's not.
So you just might need some reinforcement into existing.
Well, that's what they call rehab. So a jumbo will go in and literally probably rip it all off if it's buggered and re-support it. Right. Which is time, it's money, and until that is re-supported, if it's area has been damaged. Until you resupport that, you can't walk past it and access everywhere else. So it's like it's a staged approach, and which will be a staged pumping approach as well. So now, because this is a sulphide ore body, as we discussed, there's the water treatment issues, which is why they're in this bit of a snooker position. But then you've also got the issue with the oxidisation of the sulphide ore in the cave. So because it's a sub-level cave, that wherever that water level is underground, everything, all of the cave below that will be submerged in water. So when you put sulphide ore bodies, blasted rock comes into contact with water, it oxidises. So what that means is all the individual blasted rocks start welding back together. This oxidisation of the sulphides binds them all back together, and into even though it's been blasted, it sort of becomes one unit again. And like you can go bloody, hit it with a hammer and try and break it up, or you hit it with a bogger bucket, like high-powered equipment, but it's not a fluffed up piece of rock that you can just bog easily. So there's the issue of getting back into the draw points. Will the draw points be all oxidised? Then you might need to re-blast it. So now it's very there's not much science behind this. To re-blast something like that, you literally fill big bags up with explosives and poke bloody pipes in and fill it up and just blow the living shit out of it and hope for the best that it re-breaks it, re-fluffs it up. But it's not like when you're dealing with that sort of stuff, it's not a guaranteed success rate. So that's just to get the ore flowing again.
Well, how many of these rocks are we sort of talking about? Like, what does it look
the whole
like?
bloody thing, like tons and tons. I'm not sure of what tons and what stocks there are. So
but it's a lot.
Yeah, so I'll put a thing up on YouTube picture. Here's what a sub-level cave looks like. So see, these are your draw points. Where I'm pointing to you, you mightn't see it, but where those yellow loaders are, they're a draw point, and that big thing of broken rock is the sub-level cave. So the fine rocks there that it's bogging out, those little marble-looking things, that's the ore. So that's been blasted.
But you're talking about the issues there is actually the big rocks.
Well, what happens is those big rocks, that's the waste. So that's the waste that's like from the mine failing above, which is planned to do, that fails, it fills up that void and it just propagates down and then propagate all the way up to the surface. That's when you get that sinkhole, because everything starts failing and just moving down. Yeah. Then you have a sinkhole on the surface. So it's not determined whether that waste rock contains sulphides, which would cause that to oxidise. Yeah. But the front section of that cave front, like say the front, 10 to 10% or so will be full of blasted ore, and they sort of bog it out and it sort of propagates down. You then keep firing it and making that cave. So that blasted ore at the front of that cave that is underwater will be subject to oxidisation. And remember, all the waters run through that cave to get to the bottom. So the fact that once you start bogging it, there may be issues of getting that cave to propagate again, to flow, because if it doesn't flow, if that they call it hanging up. So if that oxidised material stays there and doesn't fall under gravity.
It gets caught. Is that what you mean?
Well, it holds there. Like when it doesn't flow. Like if you're pouring a bit of sand out of a cup or something, and say there's a big chunk stuck at the bottom, and you're hitting it, you're shaking it, and then finally the whole thing lets go. If you picture that on this scale, if that cave let go, then all that air below it has to go somewhere, and that's what causes air blasts underground. So if there's a big hang up and a void and then it all lets go at once, all that air that then gets pushed out any orifice it can find, and that air just will damage.
Is it dangerous, or is it? Yeah.
There was a North Parks historically, so that was a block cave, so it's a bit different to a sub-level cave. But North Parks had an air blast, and I think it killed 3 people.
Oh, wow.
So air blasts and propagation of caves and voids like that are a significant thing to monitor. So block caves are a bit different, because that cave's from that relies on the whole thing caving, whereas sublevel caves are blasted as you go and then it starts caving. So, but yeah, when they talk about, issues with restarting the cave, that's the sort of things that will be need to be monitored. So, that's the impact that water can have on a sulfide ore body, especially sublevel caves. So there's a lot of stages of that process. So when I think they said they're going to looking to restart, March next year to get back into Esperanza South, and that'd be the pumping, the rehab, and everything, because they've got to wait for the wet season to discharge the bulk amounts of water to start pumping it out to then re-establish it, and that's where that large recovery cost that you can see in today's announcement, was it $60 to $75 million. So yeah, that's the now, and I'm sure you'll go into the effect that's going to have on 29Metals as an organisation. That amount of capital, I think I saw today. If you added up all the headlines, the higher ends of those updated guidances, it was about $200 million for costs for this, with recovery, capital, and operating costs, just for one mine to produce 7,000 to 9,000 tonnes of copper. Yeah,
mate. It is interesting when you look at the finance piece, and I think there's a couple of things to factor in. Like this is a pretty horrific thing to happen, right? To your mine. I mean, I can't imagine. Like the effect of it is bloody damn awful. You don't expect it. It's a weather event, right? You're not planning for this sort of thing to happen. But the impact is not just on the costs and the capital; it's also on the foregone revenue, because you're not producing in that period of time as well. So there's a lot of things going on there. They did come out with their updated guidance just for 2023, and we'll flag that one up in the video for everyone. But if you just sort of add up all the ranges on both the costs and the capital side of things, including some recovery costs that they throw in there too, and then you average out the midpoint of the range, you get about $740 million there in just the costs and capital. And I think we should sort of keep in mind those costs in the context of what their balance sheet is at the moment too.
So that's over the whole. That includes Golden Grove and everything as well.
Yeah,
that's just
for the
not
group.
Capricorn, by itself.
Exactly. Yeah, that's for the group. Now that they've got the revised Capricorn guidance out there. So, taking a look at the balance sheet, right, at the end of the March quarter, the company had $163 million in cash and outstanding debt of US $132 million. So if you look at their debt, right, that US $132 million outstanding, their repayment schedule on that is to pay down $6 million US of that every quarter at the moment. And keep in mind there's interest payable on whatever's outstanding there too. In 2022, that interest rate was about 5.4%. Interest rates have gone up a fair bit, since then. So I'm sort of expecting about north of 8% as actual interest rates on the debt in 2023. So, if you plug in those numbers on what the repayment and on the projected interest expense is from 31 March through to the end of December, you can make the case that there's about Aussie dollars $45 million of cash outflow to service the debt in both interest and repayments.
Wow, so that's just the interest component
and repayments, because there's US $6 million. Yeah. So there's just a bit of cash is going to be required for the debt service piece there. And the other thing that we can see in the announcement today is that they do make the point of saying that they intend to draw down on their US $40 million working capital facility. So, they're obviously expecting, a requirement to utilise additional funds to sort of get through a stretched period. And then there's that US $40 million working capital facility that they expect to utilise for that exact purpose. But you can see how a drawn out restart here can put some pressure on 29Metals' balance sheet. And if you look at the percentage of short interest on 29Metals before today, it was 4.81% of the stock was actually short. It's quite a high number. So you can see that there was probably an expectation in the market there that a potential funding gap could emerge, and maybe some of those worries have rolled off, because you saw the share price actually go up today. And so, potentially some people might be relieved that there is some guidance and a plan ahead.
They've actually just luckily I checked it, because they were up. God, they were up up at the start of trade, and looking at this announcement. You told me, yeah. Now they are, as we speak, down 4%.
Wow.
So that's a pretty big intraday movement there. So I'll just so they were up to $1.15 at the start of trade. So they had a climb, and then they have plateaued all the way down to $1.01.
Wow, that is really fascinating. Wow.
So, because it looked like, based on that, and look, a lot of this information was most likely priced in already by the models and everything that the brokers have put out. But I guess it's more confirmed now. And look, I don't know if you mentioned already, there is an insurance claim. So potentially, we don't know the number.
Yeah.
Our trusted hot copper person said 37 to 44 million pending from insurance. So there is a portion of that, and I assume that covers part of the recovery for Esperance South. So they're definitely under a lot of pressure. Look, and I think Capricorn Copper, before this unfortunate rainfall event, wasn't classed as a world-class asset. Like, I think it was a difficult asset to begin with. It's one of those North Queensland mines that's deep and hot, and so is Golden Grove. They're difficult assets, but then you throw this on top of it, and it just really amplifies any sort of difficulties there are with these. So
I think that's a really good point, Matty, is like as an investor, I think one part of the risk equation is actually trying to figure out, how resilient could my investment be to a freak event or a black swan event? And these real horrible environmental occurrences are sort of happening more and more often, it seems. And the assets which are high cost or single or only two asset sort of producers, they're a bit less prepared to really wear the financial storm that can happen if one of those assets is hit pretty hard by one of these freak instances. And like you mentioned, one strategy can be like evaluating the geographical risk in terms of how likely are mines in certain areas to be exposed to these weather instances. If you're in the gold fields, there's a lot less likely you're going to get a flood there. You might get an earthquake, but you won't get a flood there. And
that around that wet season every year, there's always going to be, and whether that's accounted for in their schedule, there's always going to be a risk to guidance during these rainfall. There's cyclones every year, so your cyclonic areas there. This is obviously the very, very severe version, but there's always a bit of a risk of how many times have you seen in guidance updates or quarterlies, we've achieved just below guidance due to wet weather, or weather is a big factor in mine sites functioning. So and you see it very commonly. Yeah. So
I mean, this is a genuine mine is out of service for a long time, right? But most of the time, I think management teams will often some management teams will factor in like a few weeks of bad weather, and some management teams won't, and sometimes that results in the difference of meeting or exceeding or falling below guidance too. Yeah, this is. I hope they can really sort things out there and be producing copper again, and hopefully there's a favourable copper environment to be producing them, and they can do that too.
I think with Evolution, obviously got the better end of the straw in terms of, I guess, not all the holes in the cheese lining up, because they're due to start back to normal production rates by the end of the June quarter for Ernest Henry. So obviously, but you throw in the water treatment side here and the fact that they can't discharge it because of the sulphide side of things at Capricorn Copper. It's hence put them in this snookered position, which is very unfortunate for shareholders. So
yeah, the last point I'll make, Matty, is just on sort of trading comparisons. And I'm going to look at EV to FY25 EBITDA. I've gone all the way out to FY25 to hopefully account for some resumption of production.
Because I think that's when they said that's not they won't get predicted full production back to that 1.6. I think was Capricorn Copper wasn't until 2025.
Yeah. So if you look at just their EV to FY25 consensus EBITDA, they trade about 1.8 times. Compare that to Sandfire on about 4.4 times. So there's clearly a big difference there. And I think probably what you're seeing in that differential there is relating to the risk in the balance sheet that we touched on.
Yeah. And so are they looking, the position they're in, is it looking like they're going to be forced to raise money at some point to cover this or another option of funding?
No, I think maybe it's kind of, we'd be hypothesizing a bit there, but their balance sheet, could be under some stress and they might need other sources of funding. And I think when you see the high short interest percentage there's clearly some portion of the market that is anticipating a funding gap.
And I suppose these unfortunate situations and balance sheet pressure then open their assets up to people who are sniffing around as well. So, and they're like, as we've mentioned in the whole Silver Lake side of things, looking for acquisitions in distressed situations, St. Barbara being one. And look, pending what happens with 29Metals balance sheet, they could be in the same position. So,
the information contained in this episode of Money of Mine is of general nature only and does not take into account the objectives, financial situation or needs of any particular person. Before making any investment decision, you should consult with your financial advisor and consider how appropriate the advice is to your objectives, financial situation and needs.